Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a review, a comparison of the two tier 10 British heavy tanks, the Chieftain Mark 6 and the Fv215b. So the Chieftain is relatively new to the console edition. I know the PC still doesn't have this tank. Hopefully you'll be getting it soon. You are missing out, it is fantastic. Obviously the Fv215b is one of the quite old tanks in the game now, and honestly this one is never really seen about ever, to be honest. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a quick look into the history of these tanks first before we do anything. So we can see the Fv215b, it was a proposed plan for a heavy tank on the basis of the Conqueror Mark II. Unlike the production model, this modification featured the rear placement of the fighting compartment, however no prototypes were manufactured. So that just goes to show it's another one of them tanks which was never built. Obviously it was just like a concept really. And now time for the Chieftain. So the tank entered service in May 1963 and was produced until 1985. A total of 2,265 vehicles were manufactured. So this tank is one of the ones that people do have a bit of a moan about really, because it's not really a heavy tank, it is actually a main battle tank, and it is actually fairly new, so it would never have had to fight any of the tanks it does have to fight nowadays, as it is honestly a new tank. So anyways, that's enough of the history. We're just going to compare the two. Also there won't be any gameplay in this one, it's just going to be me talking through the tanks. If you do want a review, please comment down below, and obviously I will be reviewing both of these two tanks in the future. So first of all, we are just going to start off with some of the gun stats. So we'll start off with the Chieftain first. So the Chieftain has a DPM of 2,909 DPM stock, which is fantastic. And obviously, as you know, the Fv215b was the tank before this one, and it did also have a fantastic rate of fire and 7 DPM, but this tank came along and has absolutely smashed it. So yeah, 2,909 DPM does really allow you to compete with all the other tanks in the game, especially when you use like crew skills and stuff like that and equipment. The reload does get down, so your DPM goes way up into the 3,000s, so it's absolutely fantastic. You can out DPM pretty much every single tank in the game, to be honest with you. Then we'll talk about the Fv215b's DPM. So the Fv215b has a DPM of 2,758, sorry. So again, it is a little bit less than the Chieftain, but again it is still a fantastic DPM, and with crew skills and stuff like that and equipment, you can boost this tank up it way into the 3,000s as well. Obviously it's just that the Chieftain does have a bit of a better DPM, it does have a bit of a better gun, to be honest with you, but yeah, the DPM on both of these tanks is still absolutely fantastic. So then we'll go on to the penetration of both of them. So as we're on the Fv215b, it has 259mm of penetration, which is actually quite a nice amount. It does allow you to penetrate pretty much every single tank that you face, and yeah, you're not really going to have much trouble with penetrating any tank really with that. Then the Chieftain, it has 270mm of penetration on its standard rounds. Do note that the Fv215b fires armor piercing as its standard rounds, and the Chieftain fires APCR rounds as standard, so that's obviously just something to look out for. Obviously that means APCR doesn't do as well at range due to normalization and stuff like that, so just be aware of that. So next we're going to talk about the stock reload times of both of these tanks. So the Chieftain's stock reload is 8.25 seconds, but obviously with equipment and stuff like that you can get that down into the 6-second mark quite easily. And also with the Fv215b, your stock reload time is 8.7 seconds, so you can get it down quite nice as well. And both of these tanks do just rip apart any tank they come against. So next we're going to talk about the shell velocity of both of these tanks. So the Fv215b shell velocity is 1067 meters a second, so it's actually quite nice. It is one of the 120mm guns, which you don't really have to lead that much, and it is quite nice for hitting tanks on the move. So next, the Chieftains. Shell velocity is 1,372 meters per second. Obviously that is due to the rounds being APCR rounds as standard, so obviously APCR rounds do fly faster, which is what gives them their penetration ability. So next we're just going to get onto the ammo count, and I think this is one of the worst things that really does limit the Fv215b. Yeah, it really does limit this one. You can only carry 35 rounds of ammunition in this thing. 35 rounds isn't really that much. As you would see in my Conqueror review, it carries around the same amount as the Conqueror, and to be honest, it just means that your potential damage is only 14,000. So obviously 14,000 is quite a fair amount, but if you do end up having a complete monster game, or even having quite a decent game but missing quite a few shots or not penetrating, you are like severely limited, and you will run out of ammo. So yeah, 14,000 potential damage maximum if all your shells penetrate and all your shells roll, and RNGesus doesn't fuck you really. Yeah, so 14,000 average damage. Next, the Chieftain. The Chieftain's potential damage is 25,600. So as you can see there, you can carry so many more rounds than the Chieftain. It is one of the better things about this tank, and it is saying obviously lets the Fv215b down. So the amount of damage you can pull off in the Chieftain is enough to kill the enemy team 2 to 3 times over. So there's nothing really to worry about there. Yeah, also just to note, obviously the Chieftain does have 2 types of APCR. So standard APCR rounds are obviously just like the normal APCR rounds, 270 penetration, and it does have APCR as its premium rounds as well, 310 penetration. So obviously that's just something to watch out for, that the premium rounds on the Chieftain are nowhere near as good as the premium rounds on the Fv215b, which have 326 penetration on its APCR rounds. So obviously the premium rounds on the Fv215b are a bit better. Yeah, obviously just be careful, as it does use APCR, obviously normalization and stuff like that. Doesn't really allow your penetration does drop off like quicker over range, and against like angled armor and stuff like that, the shells normalization and stuff like that. So obviously that's just something to be careful of, but it doesn't really affect it too much, so you don't really need to worry about that. Next we're going to get onto the aim time of the Fv215b, and we can see that it is 1.7 seconds, which is absolutely fantastic. Definitely, well, it was the best of the heavy tanks at tier 10. And then came along the Chieftain with a whopping 1.5 second aiming time, which is just absolutely fantastic as well. Obviously 1.5 seconds is just fantastic. It allows you to pop up, put shots in really quickly with a very like low risk of taking a shot back. Same with the Fv215b, 1.7 seconds, absolutely fantastic. If you do decide to use a gun lane drive on this tank, you don't really need to, because the aiming time is still really good. Obviously you can see I have vents on both of my tanks, so it does help that out a little bit, but it doesn't really need help because it's still fantastic. So we're going to move on to the dispersion of the guns, the accuracy in other words. So the Chieftain's accuracy, 0.32 on the 120mm gun, absolutely fantastic again, as I said before. The Chieftain's accuracy is great, its gun is great, as well as the Fv215b's, which we'll get onto now. So the dispersion of the Fv215b is 0.33, so it's obviously just a little bit worse than the Chieftain, but it's still very accurate gun. Honestly, I find the Chieftain's gun a little bit troll compared to the Fv215b's gun. I do prefer the Fv215b's gun, to be honest with you. So we'll just move on to a bit more of like the dispersion stuff like that. So when moving the tank on the Chieftain, you get a 0.12 dispersion, and when turning the tank you get 0.12 as well, and when turning the turret you get 0.10, which isn't too bad really, it's not too shabby. But obviously now we'll move on to the Fv215b, which has amazing gun handling. So when you're moving it's 0.1, when you're turning the tank as well it's 0.1, and when you're turning the turret it's 0.08. so this tank is incredible at firing on the move. Obviously the Chieftain is still quite good at firing on the move, but the Fv215b is just so much better. If you saw my Object 140 review, you saw how good that was firing on the move. Yeah, this is just as good really. It's absolutely fantastic at firing on the move. So next we move on to the elevation and the depression of the two tanks. So the Chieftain has 20 degrees of gun elevation, which is actually very nice. It allows you to point the gun right up and stuff like that. You don't really have to worry about shooting tanks on hillsides. It also gets a fantastic 10 degrees of gun depression, and when using the tank's amazing turret armor, it does really help out, and your turret is very, very strong, so using the 10 degrees of gun depression does allow you to work those ridge lines. So now the Fv215b. The Fv215b gets 15 degrees of elevation, which is actually alright. It's not too bad at all really. It's 5 degrees less than the Chieftain. So obviously if tanks are above you, it can be a little bit tricky to shoot up at them, but it's not that much of an issue really, so there's not really much to worry about. Depression wise, you get 7 degrees on this one, which is the same as you get on the Conqueror. Obviously it is workable. Just be aware though that because the turret is rear mounted, obviously it is just a bit tricky. When you come over a ridge and stuff like that, the shots in your lower plate are just going to go straight through and you won't be able to get the gun down to shoot at them, so obviously just be very, very careful about that. So next we move on to the mobility of the two tanks. So the Fv215b's top speed is 34 km an hour, which is actually not too bad really. It's the same as most, it's about average. But it does get some very nice terrain resistances, which we will explain in a second. Also the Chieftain has a top speed of 42 km an hour, which is a bit faster, but the engine is weaker, but obviously we'll get on to more of that in a minute. So 42 for the Chieftain and a 34 for the Fv215b. Reverse speed for the Fv215b is 12 km an hour. It's not very fast. Obviously you're not going to be going anywhere in reverse, so it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. The Chieftain also goes at 15 km an hour in reverse, this one, so it's a little bit better, but obviously you're not going to be going anywhere in reverse, so it doesn't really matter. So next we'll look at the horsepower. This is what I think lets the Chieftain down really. The horsepower is 750 horsepower for the Chieftain's engine, so obviously it's not too bad. The 750 horsepower engine does give it a power to weight ratio of 13.64 horsepower per ton, so it's not too bad really. It's not shocking, but it's not great. Obviously the tank doesn't really feel that sluggish, but it does struggle really to get up to that 42 km an hour top speed limit. However, the Fv215b its engine has 950 horsepower for a power to weight ratio of 13.57. Now that is less than the Chieftain's power to weight ratio, just because this tank is a lot heavier, but, and there's a big but with this one, the Fv215b's ground resistances are fantastic, and you will keep your 34 km an hour top speed limit pretty much everywhere you go, so there's not really much to worry about that. But as I said before, the Chieftain does feel a little bit sluggish compared to the Fv215b. So the weight of the two tanks, the Fv215b is weighing in an impressive 70 tonnes, which is actually quite a lot really, so it does allow you to ram some other tanks. Obviously don't go ramming E100s, Mouses, stuff like that, but feel free to ram like mediums and lights and stuff like that, and you will most likely come off a lot better than them. Next, the Chieftain's weighs 55 tonnes. Obviously it is a bit lighter, and the frontal armour isn't very good, so when you do make impacts you're probably going to come off worse in a ram in the Chieftain, so it's best never to ram anything in this one really, unless it's something very, very light. So next we'll just get onto the terrain resistances. This is what makes the Fv215b more mobile, I think. Well, it obviously does so. The Fv215b terrain resistance on hard terrain it is just 1, which is actually very nice. Medium terrain is 1.2, which is actually very nice as well, and on soft terrain it is 2, so again it is very nice. It does allow this tank to get around quite quickly around the battlefield. No need to worry about mobility really in this one. So the Chieftain's terrain resistances on hard, you have 1.2, which is a little bit worse, 0.2 worse than the Fv215b. On medium it is 1.4, which is again 0.2 worse than the Fv215b. And then obviously on soft terrain it is 2.1, so only 0.1 worse than the Fv215b. as I said before, the power to weight ratio and stuff like that, and the lackluster engine power does make this tank feel a little bit sluggish in my opinion, and I do prefer the Fv215b's mobility. So obviously the traverse of both of these tanks, the traverse on the Chieftain is 40 degrees on the tracks, which is actually quite nice. It's not too bad at all really. It does allow you to swing round. It is quite nippy, although the engine power and stuff like that is a little bit lackluster. It is quite nice and easy to turn around and shoot at the enemy tanks that are going to try and circle you and stuff like that. The Fv215b's traverse is 38 degrees on the tracks. Yet again, it's not slow. Neither of these tanks are slow, traverse wise anyway. Obviously the Fv215b did have the best traverse of any of the tier 10 heavy tanks before the Chieftain came in, so it obviously does allow you to whip that gun around quite quick, but that's even better when you include the turret traverse of both of the tanks. So the Fv215b has a 34 degrees turret traverse, which is actually very nice. And the Chieftain has only a 30 degree traverse for the tank, so 30 degrees turret traverse for the Chieftain, which isn't too bad really, considering the tracks turn at 40 degrees. It is quite strange that the turret turns 10 degrees slower, but obviously using the track traverse you can swing that turret around very, very fast indeed. The Fv215b as well, 34 degrees on the turret, which is actually very nice, 4 degrees less than the track traverse, so you can swing that gun around very fast, just to get other tanks that circle you and stuff like that. This tank is quite vulnerable to it, as its side and rear armour is shocking, as well as the Chieftain, so that's always something to look out for. So now we're going to look at probably one of the obviously one of the most important parts of a heavy tank, which is the armour. So that first we're going to take a look at the Chieftain's armour. As you can see here, it's a bit of a mixed match of colours. So the hull armour on the Chieftain is 85 at the front, which isn't very good at all really, obviously, but that isn't the full story. So 85 on the front of the hull, 50 on the sides and 25 at the rear. So the 85mm of armour is obviously that whole green portion of the front of the tank there. Obviously the frontal upper plate, if you can see there, it is very, very well sloped, and if you hit anywhere on that tank, if you're yeah, if you're level to the tank, the upper plate's going to be an auto ricochet, so there's nothing to worry about, especially when you're using the gun depression. Nothing's going to pen your upper plate, so there's nothing really to worry about. But again, with both of the tanks, there is a crippling weak spot on both of them, and that is the lower plate. So the lower plate on the Chieftain is horrible. It is huge, it's hideous, and it contains all the ammo racks underneath it, just behind it. So obviously just be very, very careful that shots through your plate, lower plate and stuff like that will go straight into ammo racks and damage them. I'll show you the ammo racks quickly. As you can see there, 2 of the ammo racks are through the lower plate, and there is one in the middle of the tank. So obviously getting shot in the front of the tank, like if you try and shoot where the bills connect, that's where you want to hit really, and that's going to pretty much guarantee that you damage the tank's ammo rack. So obviously if you can, try and hit them, and if you again, if you're playing in the Chieftain, just try and cover your lower plate at all times. Also, like if you are slightly above it, you're going to go straight through the upper plate as well, because you can just fire down onto it, so that's also something to look out for. The turret armour on the Chieftain is 250 at the front, 140 on the sides, and only 30 at the rear. So obviously the front of the Chieftain's turret, if we look at it now, it is all kinds of funny shapes and angles and colours. So the front of the turret, honestly, I can rely on it. I think you can rely on the turret armour on the Chieftain. Obviously there is quite a big cupola, but it's quite hard to hit, especially if you keep wiggling back and forward and stuff like that. Just be aware that the box on the side of the turret is a no hit zone, so don't bother shooting there. But yeah, the front of the Chieftain's turret is quite weak. Is very, very strong. The only weak spot I'd say is just above the gun, where you can see that it starts to flatten out a little bit. When you're not using your gun depression, that is equivalent of about 230mm of penetration needed to get through that. But once you start using your gun depression again, that just becomes an auto ricochet, as well as most of the turret, so there's no really need to worry about that. So next, obviously before we go on to that, as we can see, the armour just on the sides of the turret. Obviously the back of the turret, if you are fighting one of these things, you get in the back, load high explosive, put one straight through the back, only 25mm of armour on the back of this one and 30 on the back of the turret. So if you can hit the back of it anywhere with a high explosive round, you're going to penetrate and absolutely decimate it. So that is obviously my best choice plan for action if I'm ever fighting one of these things. Also, artillery hitting this thing, top of the tank, is incredibly weak. Get hit by artillery, you're dead. Kiss your sweet ass goodbye, really. So we'll just look into the Fv215b's armour quickly. So on the front of the hull it is 152mm, 101mm on the sides and 76mm at the back. Obviously, as again on the Chieftain, the lower plate is just absolutely horrendous. Shots through there. The most annoying thing about this tank is the fuel tanks are located in the lower plate on the front part of the engine. The fuel tank, sorry. Can't speak today. So as you can see, that whole block at the front is the fuel tanks. Shoot anywhere there, you're going to get set on fire. So just be very, very, very careful. I do carry a premium fire extinguisher on this one just because it is such a it's such a pain in the arse when trying to fight one of these things. Shots through the lower plate will go straight through and most likely set you on fire, so that's one of the biggest downfalls of this tank. But if you can cover the lower plate, the upper plate is actually very, very nice. It is 152mm thick, sloped back at a very nice angle, giving it the equivalent of about 300mm of armour. Obviously if you start firing down it does decrease the thickness, but far range and stuff like that, if you can side scrape, it does make the armour very, very effective indeed. So obviously with this tank, the turret being rear mounted, it does side scrape very, very, very well. So obviously when you are side scraping, just be aware, as you can see here on the armour, that kind of square bit there, if you are side scraping, that bit does become literally flat, 90-degree angle. So if you are side scraping like this, just be aware of that. It's the easiest thing to shoot on the Fv215b. If they are side scraping, it's very, very hard to penetrate, but if you can hit that spot, it's pretty much guaranteed penetration every single time. So next we'll get onto the turret armour of the Fv215b. It is 254mm on the front there, 152mm on the sides and 101mm on the back. So as we said with the Conqueror as well, the Conqueror's turret is pretty much exactly the same as the Fv215b, sorry. It is just a little bit upscaled with a little bit more armour stuck on there. So again, you can if you can get hull down in this tank, it is a little bit tricky because of the front, the rear mounted turret. But if you can, obviously you can rely on your turret armour. The cupola is quite strange. It is quite hard to penetrate though, and it is mostly an auto ricochet if you hit it anywhere apart from the sides and that front flat bit there, if you can see that. Yeah, but it will be an auto ricochet apart from that on most of the turret. Again, the top of the tank is quite weak, so if you do get hit, penetration every time really from artillery. Also, guns with 150mm or 151mm or more guns will just overmatch the top of the turret and the top of the engine deck, so just be very, very careful about that as well. But overall, I do feel like the Fv215b's armour is a lot more reliable than the Chieftain's, just because it is like a lot more well-rounded, if I dare say that. It is a lot more well-rounded, the Fv215b, I think. I think the Chieftain is very, very situational. So yeah, but the Fv215b is great for side scraping. It's got a great gun, good turret armour and stuff like that. The Chieftain, really, its hull is just shocking, to be honest. The only good thing about the tank armour wise is the turret. Obviously just try and hide your hull at all times in that one. So next we're just going to talk about the hit points of each of the vehicles. So the Chieftain has 2,200 hit points, which is actually not too bad. It's not that much though. It has 100 more hit points than the AMX-50B, and it has the same amount of hit points as the Panzer E100, so obviously it isn't a large amount of hit points. You can take a couple of hits in this one. Obviously, just in any tank really, you don't really want to be like taking shots and stuff like that, so just be very, very careful. Taking like 1 or 2 hits from a Panzer will kill you, so just be very, very careful. And then the Fv215b gets 2,500 hit points, which is actually very, very nice. It is one of the highest hit points in the game, obviously behind the E100 Mouse and the Type 5 Heavy, which are the super heavy tanks. But apart from that, this one does have the largest amount of hit points, and with the good armour as well. It does allow you to trade shots in this one, so I would say that trading shots is one of the best ways to survive in this tank. Side scrape, bait a shot into your tracks or into your side armour, which will be an auto ricochet, then pop out, shoot, and by the time they've reloaded you can probably shoot again. Same with the Chieftain really, just trade shots off your turret, pop out, let them shoot your turret, they ricochet, you shoot, and then you can just stay up and shoot them once or twice before they can reload again, because the rate of fire on these guns is just absolutely insane. And then we get onto the fire chance of these tanks. So the Chieftains only has a 10% fire chance. As you can see, the engine is in the back of the tank. If you do get hit in the back, obviously just be very, very careful, as it can obviously damage your engine, stuff like that, and this tank isn't the fastest, so having a damaged engine will noticeably make it very, very slow indeed. So yeah, that's just obviously something to look out for. About 10% fire chance isn't too bad, so you can in fact skip out a fire extinguisher on this one if you want to. The Fv215b on the other hand, it's a pain in the arse really. As I said before, that box in the front of the hull is your fuel tank, so getting shot there, you're going to get lit on fire. The amount of times I've been set on fire in this thing is unreal, so that's why I take an automatic fire extinguisher. But obviously if you do want to decrease that, get firefighting on your crew, stuff like that, and take an automatic fire extinguisher obviously, because this one does really need it. Next, the last thing we talk about really is the view ranges of the tanks. So the Fv215b has a fantastic 410 meters view range. It does allow you to outspot a lot of tanks and stuff like that. Yeah, so it does have a fantastic view range. The Chieftain's view range, to be honest, is a little bit lackluster, even how new the tank is and how modern it is really. It is only 390 millimeters, 390 meters, sorry. So it's obviously not that far, not as good as the Fv215b, but it still gets the job done. So anyway guys, I think that is enough really for the comparison of both of these two tanks. Obviously there isn't any gameplay in this one, sorry about that. Please comment down below though if you would like to see some gameplay of each of the tanks. Obviously I will be doing reviews on each of them very soon, so just look out for that on my channel. But thanks for watching guys, I hope you did enjoy the comparison video. Please comment down below if you'd like to see any more comparison videos. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll catch you all later. Thanks for watching.